When I was doing my research for my doctorate on Gen Z, I read a lot of different resources. What is wrong with Gen Z? What are the issues with Gen Z in the workplace? Why are they lazy? Why is Gen Z argumentative? How do I work with Gen Z? And I think these are all huge misconceptions based on what I've learned.
So, welcome to the podcast, listeners. There's a new generation shaping the future of education. Young teachers who enter classrooms with passion, high expectations, and a desire for meaningful impact. But today's reality can be a little challenging, where Gen Z educators are also leaving the profession faster than any generation before them. To explore how leadership must evolve to explore and retain this new bold workforce, we're joined today by Rex Booth, Superintendent of Trigg County Public Schools in Kentucky, a leader known for visibility, transparency, and a deep relational approach to culture. Welcome to our podcast, Rex. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. So I'm particularly excited about this podcast because I'm also a part of this Gen Z workforce. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear your insights on the same. So
Yeah,
I
and if I say something wrong, maybe you can correct me.
definitely, I don't think that would be the case, but yeah, I'd love to do that. So,
Good. Good.
okay, so I'd love to know a little about your background before we can begin. So, you've served as a teacher, a coach, counselor, principal, and now a superintendent. So, how have
Mhm.
these experiences shaped the kind of leader that you are today?
I think, just seeing things from multiple perspectives. I've been blessed in my educational journey to kind of do a little bit of everything, right? So thinking about, beginning as a teacher, serving as a coach for over, 10 to 15 years, coached basketball and then a little golf and track as well. And then moving into the counseling role. From there, I went to the principal's role, and here I am now as a superintendent. So I think one of the biggest things that those experiences have allowed for me to really grow in my leadership is how intentional I am on not forgetting those experiences. There's a lot of decisions that are made from a superintendent seat, and I feel like a lot of times that those decisions are made without the perspectives of various, roles, right? When making decisions, feedback is one thing that I value. I try to make sure that we are obviously getting voice and feedback on a variety of different things when making decisions. But at the end of the day, before a decision is finalized, I think about what's this going to do to impact teachers? How is this going to impact our coaches? How is this decision, going to play into the counseling role or the principal's role? And, most of the time those decisions kind of trickle down into the schools, and then the principals are really the ones that are responsible for implementing things at their specific level. So just being fortunate enough to have served in a variety of experiences throughout my career, I think has really helped me from a leadership standpoint.
And I think being in so many roles helps you wear multiple hats when you can think about how all of these roles would be affected when you make a particular decision. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
awesome. Yeah. Okay, so returning to lead the same district that you once served as a young educator, what does that mean to you personally and professionally?
Yeah, so I was actually a teacher and coach at Trigg County Schools way back, 2012, 2013-ish. So um, from a personal standpoint, it was really nice to be able to reconnect with some old friends. Obviously, we had been a part of this community before, made some friends, stay connected with those folks. So to be able to come back from a personal standpoint and really re-strengthen those connections instead of a social media like or a comment on their birthday or something like that, it become a more personable connection to be able to come back and really revitalize some of those friendships. From a professional standpoint, I think it was important because it made the transition a little easier. We were familiar with the community and their priorities from an educational standpoint. I kind of understood the students that we were servicing every day. Just from a transition standpoint, it wasn't like I was coming into a completely new environment that I was totally unfamiliar with. I had connections, like I mentioned, from the personal standpoint to bounce ideas off of, and really have the ability to go in and say, hey, good about Trigg County schools, and then vice versa, what could be improved, and to be able to rely on those folks and my own knowledge of the district when thinking about the direction that we were headed under my leadership. That was a huge thing for me professionally.
That's pretty awesome. So, I think with that, I would like to start with the topic of the day, that is understanding Gen Z educators. So, in your view, what is it that defines a Gen Z educator, their values, their priorities, and their expectations from leadership?
Yeah, so for context for your listeners and subscribers, I mean, your Gen Z is anyone essentially born around the time from 1997 to 2012. Now, that will vary by a year or two depending on which study you're reading, but it falls right in that 1997 to 2012 range. From a value standpoint, I feel like the Gen Z cohort is very purpose driven. They want to do meaningful work, right? And I think part of that is the why. I think the why, you talk about Simon Sinek explaining the why. That is one thing that I try to be very intentional about in my day to day, is making sure that people understand the why behind what we're doing or the decisions that are being made. I also think from a value standpoint, Generation Z is a little different than previous generations when it comes to their workload and work-life balance. And I think that gets attacked sometimes unfairly. You will hear some of your older teachers and things of that nature saying, well, I get there an hour before the students do, and I don't leave until 2 hours after. And I feel like this generation really understands that balance a lot better from the standpoint of, yeah, we're not going to roll in right as soon as the students do. We will beat them to the school, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also have lives, and we have to take care of ourselves and prioritize our own health and our, from a physical and a mental health standpoint, and prioritize family. So I think that's really cool about your generation, the Generation Z. And then from an authenticity and trust standpoint, transparency is key. And a lot of times it doesn't really matter what the message is, right? As long as the message is transparent. Now, it may not always be what a Generation Z member wants to hear, but at the same time, I think they're going to be a whole lot more accepting because of the honesty and the truthfulness that leader comes with. You asked about priorities. From a priority standpoint, I think growth is very highly valued. You don't want to be stagnant in anything that you're doing. From a Generation Z standpoint, they place a high priority on coaching and mentoring, and thinking about those induction programs from an education specific standpoint are huge. Another thing from a connection or a priority standpoint is those connections. You know, the Generation Z cohort is probably the most diverse and connected cohort that we have ever experienced. So connection and collegial environment and things of that nature are huge. And then from an expectation standpoint, what I found in my research, I use the MLQ5X, the multi-factor leadership questionnaire. And what I found is that Gen Z heavily favors a transformational leader. They want someone that is inspiring and has a compelling vision. They are interested, like we just talked about, that integrity and that authenticity and making sure that their leaders are honest. I think they expect to be allowed to create. This generation is full of entrepreneurs and innovative thinkers, and I think it is very important to this generation, regardless of where they're at, whether it be in a school environment or any other work environment. The freedom to be able to create is huge. But, we've mentioned transformational leadership as being heavily favored, but there's also some transactional leadership qualities that Generation Z folks look for. And most notably, Gen Z folks like the structure. I think they like knowing where they are and what the goals are and things of that nature. They also like clarity and timely feedback. Those are important things because we've already talked about growth. Well, you can't grow without that feedback. So I hope I answered your question. That probably was very long-winded, but the Gen Z folks, they have a lot that they're looking for, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think you described it in a very wholesome sort of a way. So, yeah, I mean, even if that answer was long, it was very on point. So, we really appreciate that. You were also talking about feedback. So, that
Mhm.
relates very well to one of the questions that I had for you today. That is, recognition and feedback deeply matter to this generation. What systems or
Mhm.
habits have you developed that has helped young teachers feel seen, supported, and appreciated at their jobs?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that, in education, you hear a lot about the walkthroughs and the evaluations and things of that nature on teachers. And in this district specifically, and the schools that I've led in the past, I don't want our walkthroughs and our evaluations to feel evaluative. I want those to be opportunities for growth. And I want it to feel more like a mentoring and coaching aspect. So, the feedback that we give, one, the expectation is that it is timely.
Hmm.
You know, our principals or myself or our director of instruction, we do a walkthrough, and it's not about evaluating the teacher. One of the shifts that we have made this year, especially, is to John Antonetti's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with John Antonetti's work, but he has the engagement cube and the rigor matrix. So we are not going in necessarily to evaluate the teacher. We are going into classrooms and making visits and being visible so that we can see the task. And I think that is a huge mind shift when you think about, the evaluations and things of that nature, because it used to be based on the teacher. But I think given the way that our students are learning and needing the hands-on engagement and being allowed to create, because keep in mind, we're not just talking about Gen Z from the standpoint of employment. The youngest Gen Z members are 13. So you're looking at your seventh graders all the way up to your seniors as students as Gen Z. So we've named these priorities and these expectations that the Generation Z cohort has, but we're not just talking about that from the standpoint of, an employable
Hmm.
person. We're talking about that from a student person, and they want those creativity and engagement opportunities as well. So we've kind of shifted our focus here in Trigg County in particular to being more task oriented and providing feedback on the task versus making sure that we are evaluating teachers. And we do that obviously from a compliance standpoint. We have to. But our mission is to make sure that we are coaching and mentoring our teachers from a task standpoint. Another important thing, real quick, that I'll hit on is that induction and mentoring process. That is a huge thing that we want to make sure that our teachers that come into this district know that they are part of a team. And from day one, we want to make sure that they have those mentors and those partner teachers that they can rely on, so they can bounce ideas off of. And then, the PLC communities are a very big part of what we do here too. So those are all opportunities for feedback that we really prioritize and are intentional about.
That makes a lot of sense. And since we were already talking about growth and leadership, Gen Z often wants rapid growth and leadership opportunities. So, how is Trigg County creating pathways where young educators can lead early and feel a sense of progress in their work?
Yeah, so we just mentioned the mentoring part. Um, that's not just about making sure that we're supporting our new teachers. We feel like that mentoring and partner teaching role from an experienced teacher who's been with us for a while is an experience for leadership. So that is allowing them to take what they have learned and, not necessarily just about the district, but also from teaching as a whole, and pour into those younger teachers or those teachers that are new to the district. So, that is an important leadership opportunity that we take a lot of pride in, to make sure that, we are pushing our teachers to be more than just teachers. We want them to be leaders as well. From another standpoint, one of the things that we focused on this year is to identify some of those younger teachers who clearly exude that leadership trait.
Mhm.
So I will be completely transparent here. If you would have asked me at the beginning of my career, I would have never dreamed of being a superintendent. In all honesty, I would have never even thought about being a school principal.
Hmm.
My goal was to teach and coach.
Hmm.
Uh, and without being identified and without having mentors and without having people in my corner to push me beyond what, I had my own expectations, essentially.
Hmm.
I wouldn't, been the principal of two different schools, and I wouldn't be sitting in this seat as the superintendent of Trigg County Schools. So we think that is important to identify those folks and really start pushing them, because a lot of times people don't see what they're capable of for themselves. They need those folks in the background saying, "Hey, you can do more than what you're doing," and giving them the confidence to do so.
So I think this reminds me something very similar that my bosses keep on telling me. They keep on pushing me to do something little extra. One thing where I struggle at, I think I speak for a lot of other Gen Zs as well, is that sometimes there's this hesitation, right? When you are asked to push yourself a little, there's this hesitation of what if something goes wrong, or what if I'm not able to do something right. So while we understand that there's this need to push, how do we get rid of this hesitation, or how do you help educators get rid of this hesitation that may sometimes exist?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the nicknames for Generation Z is the anxiety generation. And I think that's, solidified in what you just said, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's a confidence thing,
Mm.
right? And I believe that goes back to the leadership style in which you work with, or, regardless of what you're in, whether it's work or whether it's playing on a team, whatever it is, I think it goes back to leadership style, and setting the culture and making sure that those supports are being provided. We talked earlier about that need for connection and that need for mentoring and feedback. I think there's also a need to be included, to have your voice heard. And the more opportunity that we can do that, and give folks an opportunity to share what they're thinking or how they feel, or, even having the confidence to say, "I appreciate the decision that you just made, but this is how it affects me." When you do things like that in your leadership, that gives confidence for later on down the line. Myself, for example, could go to one of these young leaders that we've identified and give them those examples of, like, "I appreciate how you were involved in leading this lesson, and I appreciate how you were involved in being on this committee, and I appreciate how, we made this decision and you came to me and, you gave, hey, I appreciate the decision. Here's the positives, but here's how I was affected, and some things to think about." And through all of those things, what I've been able to see is that you have those capabilities to be a leader. And from that standpoint, if you are, reinforcing that push with some specific examples of how that individual has already showcased leadership, I think that helps kind of ease that anxiety, because you're coming in with confidence and actual facts in which they've already shown that. And then from a psychological standpoint, we hope that that young leader is going to say, "You know what? He's right. I did do A, B, and C. I am fully capable of doing what they're asking me to do next from a leadership standpoint, realizing my true potential." And then I think in that relationship building, when things get hard, for example, if we do target and push a young leader into maybe exploring a master's or a rank one in school administration, that's not always going to be easy. Those classes are demanding, and there's going to be some things that are going to take people out of their comfort zones, and that's what they're set up to do. But at the same time, if the relationship's been set and we're doing our job as current leaders, then I feel like the anxiety is also relieved, because that young leader knows that they can come to us as current leaders who have been there, and get help in those situations.
So I think the evidence building bit of it, right, where you just point at the facts or like things that they've already done, also just being a role model sort of a thing, or like a support system that they can actually reach out to if they get in trouble. So yeah, I think that is a wonderful way to go about it. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty amazing. So looking at some challenges, right? What are the biggest challenges young educators express when it comes to staying in their profession?
We can start with the obvious. I think the pay in education is something to obviously talk about. I think it is a thing that is an issue across the country. Obviously, people need to make a good living and want to be able to do the things that they want to do, right? So when I think about the pay in Kentucky specifically, our starting teachers make around $38,000 to $39,000 a year. Looking at it from a national standpoint, the national average is around $41,000 or $42,000 a year. The thing about that is the average cost of living, just to live in Kentucky is right at 40,000. So if a teacher is making $38,000 a year, but the minimum cost of living in Kentucky as a single adult is $40,000 a year, these teachers are already having to, think about how am I going to either A, pay the bills, or B, find roommates that I can work with, because my job, in which I have went and earned a 4-year bachelor's degree at minimum, is not enough to even allow myself to live.
Yep.
And then some of those folks are graduating college who are already married. Some have children. We're at a time that teachers are coming in from other professions. So, they are having to be emergency certified, or what we call in Kentucky is option 6, in which they are teaching while taking master's level courses. So, the pay is huge. That said, I don't think that pay is the only issue when it comes to retention and recruitment from an educational standpoint. I think there's more that goes into it because, early on we talked about the number one thing that Generation Z is they're purpose driven. And what more purposeful employment is education. You have the opportunity every single day to make an impact on the students that walk into your classroom. That is the definition of purpose. So I don't think pay is really the only thing that is, a negative from a negative standpoint or a challenge. So that's why I did the work that I did in my research in figuring out, what is the leadership style that this generation wants to work under. And I think that's the biggest challenge is when you consider the leaders in education or whatever else, most of those folks are probably older, from a different generation, and those generations believe in transactional leadership. So when you have transactional leadership at the top, and trickling down even into the principles and things of that nature, that is a direct conflict with how Generation Z wants to be led from a transformational standpoint. So I feel like that's probably the biggest challenge is getting our current leaders to understand that the workforce that is entering right now, they are not interested in the transactional leadership. They want to be mentored. They want to be supported. They want to make sure that their voice is heard. They want to have an impact. And I think one of the biggest things behind that is the culture, right? So transformational leadership has to set a transformational culture. And what I mean by that is that Generation Z is given the opportunity, to explore and innovate and get kids out of their seats and get them engaged and generate rigorous lessons. It's not just a sit and get anymore. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of about what we're doing here in Trigg County is that we are pushing our teachers, not necessarily to fail, but not to be afraid of failure, because those specific ways of teaching are not always easy and they're not always going to be pretty. You're going to have some controlled chaos in your classrooms, and that's okay. And like I said, they're not always going to be pretty, but I think our culture is shifting toward, we are supported by our leadership here. They understand that it's not always going to be pretty. One of the things we like to say is we're either going to win or we're going to learn. That task or that lesson is going to be a win, and our kids have grown from it, and they have mastered the standards that we're trying to get them to master. Or it was an epic fail, and that's okay, because what we have done is we have learned from that, and we're going to have the confidence to know that my principals and my superintendent support me in that, and that I'm going to be able to learn from that experience. And then tomorrow we're going to start all over again. We're going to try it again.
So I think from what I am seeing, right, there's permission to fail. Fail is not linked to direct, just bashing someone. It's just, there's place for just learning and a lot of growth. So that is very awesome. So moving on to another related topic, that is mental health. New teachers today face intense pressures in their first years. So how does your district ensure that educators feel supported emotionally and that they're not alone in their work?
Yeah, I think that goes back to mentoring. And we've talked about that a couple times already today, but that is really the foundation, is that support and that mentoring. We know that Generation Z values feedback, and they value that feedback in a timely and direct manner. It's not just a bottled, canned feedback like, hey, you did this really good today. Are you really, how?
Mm,
Right? And why? Those are two important questions. So that's why we try to assign our teachers a mentor that generally is either teaching in the same grade level from an elementary standpoint. Our grades are kind of potted off in our schools, or from a middle school, high school, secondary standpoint, it's more content based. So we try to align our newer teachers with a mentor from either that grade level or that content level. So that way they've already got that piece in common. Uh, and then just making sure that we are doing other things to support. We do a new teacher welcome day, in which we introduce them to a variety of different people and what it is that they do. So that way, if you have finance questions, well, you've seen the finance officer and the finance team, you know how to reach those folks. If you have an HR question or an HR issue, you know who to go and talk to. I think just, that visibility and making sure that people understand who it is they can reach out to and how to do so is important. But the mentor teachers and the principals really do a good job here. Our administration does a good job of making sure that they're taking care. A growth area for us is rounding. We want to be very intentional about getting into our new teachers' classrooms, not necessarily to observe their teaching, but maybe on a planning period or something along those lines, just to check in and see how it's going. Their positive experiences, and then very similar to what we talked about a while ago, your wins or your learning opportunities. We also want to know what's not going well, and how can we improve that, because it is a constant growth opportunity for us. We want to make sure that we're not getting stagnant ourselves as a district, and making sure that we're providing everything it is that our folks need, because retention is key right now. We're I'm going to say this and I'm going to knock on wood. Our turnover numbers are really good, and most people say that Trigg County Schools is a place that they love to be and want to continue to be. So that's something we take a lot of great pride in.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised because, when you have such a positive environment, there's no wonder why people want to stay here. Going back
Sure.
to something that you said earlier, right, about Gen Z having this work life balance where they will just have their own life and also work. Sometimes that's looked at as laziness or just, that Gen Z
Yeah.
is very lazy. What do you have to say about that? And do you agree or disagree with that?
That is a huge misconception, I feel like. And that's not just a misconception in the education world. When I was doing my research for my doctorate on Gen Z, I read a lot of different resources. What is wrong with Gen Z? What are the issues with Gen Z in the workplace? Why are they lazy? Why is Gen Z argumentative? How do I work with Gen Z? And I think these are all huge misconceptions based on what I've learned. From the laziness standpoint, it's not laziness, it's prioritization. Right? I don't feel like that Generation Z, your cohort is extremely hardworking and purpose driven, and you care and you want to do things correctly, and at the highest level. I don't think that's being called into question. But you have, very similar to talking about what we did earlier, a lot of older leaders. We have teachers that are in 20 plus years, and I was one of them that was there early and stayed late. And, I just thought that was what I had to do. Um, and it's not necessarily the case. And, what I found myself saying is a lot, especially in the last couple of years, is it's going to be here tomorrow. You know, why are we staying till 5 and 6 o'clock? You have two young kids at home and a husband or a wife that you need to prioritize just as much. And that's a mind shift that I'm having to do myself, because for so long I was the type that, like I said, I got there early and I stayed late.
Mm,
But I'm learning from the Generation Z cohort that that is not necessarily the most effective way to do things.
mm,
Um, One has to take care of themselves before they can take care of others.
mm.
And I feel like it's a prioritization. It's not a laziness, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and then as far as like, we mentioned some Gen Zs are said to be argumentative
Mm,
or uncompliant.
mm,
And I don't think that's necessarily the case either. I think it is just the importance that the generation has in, being heard and feeling as though they are part of the team. I've heard the term horizontal leadership, right? It's not a transactional piece where there's a boss and there's an employee. It
mm,
should be horizontal leadership where the two are working hand in hand together in
mm.
order to reach a common goal. So, I feel like those two things are huge misconceptions of Generation Z. And I myself have learned a lot from Generation Z and am trying to implement that into my own millennial life, right? Uh, and I hope other people will do the same and really get away from the misconceptions and really start studying that, hey, maybe some of the things that they value and prioritize are making sense.
That is really heartwarming as a Gen Z, and I think our listeners will also really enjoy listening to this bit. So, okay, that was pretty awesome. So, I want to move on to a very trendy topic nowadays, that is AI in education. So, I'd love
Yes.
to know your take about because there's a lot of worry about AI replacing teachers altogether. So, what is your take on that?
Well, I think it's really cool from the standpoint of, the Gen Z cohort
Mm,
has kind of been identified as the digital generation,
mm,
a generation that has grown up with device in hand from the time they were born.
mm,
And I think this, we are into the Gen Alpha
mm,
as we speak, and
mm,
I feel like Gen Alpha and the following generation are more than likely going to be tied with AI.
mm,
Um, it is a new technology. It is a powerful technology. It is a technology that there are still a lot of unknowns. But you think about the printing press or the typewriter or the computer,
mm,
the iPhone, all of these were, monumental upgrades to technology
mm,
that people thought were going to just sweep in and take everybody's jobs and
mm,
change the world. Um, and they did change the world. But what people do is they, you know, elevate and they innovate and they become, more. I don't really know the word I'm trying to say, but they adapt,
mm,
right,
mm.
to the way that things are going. So AI is not going anywhere. AI is going to only grow from where it currently is. And I think if it is used correctly, it's going to be a very powerful tool. And from a leadership standpoint, I've heard both sides. Some leaders are saying we want to completely ban AI from our schools to make sure that our kids are doing the work. From the other standpoint, I'm a former math teacher, and I look at it like a calculator.
Mm,
Have this tool,
mm,
we're doing our kids a disservice if we don't teach how to use the tool. And I think that's the key with AI is that people have to be taught how to use it.
mm,
There were scary bad things on the internet when it was first invented. That doesn't mean it went away. We
mm.
just educate our folks on how to be appropriate users of the internet. And I think the same thing's going to be with AI. We've got to provide education on how to appropriately and effectively use it. And if we do so, I think it's a powerful tool that's going to be around for a very long time.
Yeah, that's a wonderful perspective. That leads to my next question. What human strengths do you think Gen Z or just educators in general bring that AI will never be able to replace?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we've really started talking about recently, I read an article on LinkedIn, and then I've shared it with our leadership team a couple weeks ago, was about how we as educators need to change the way that we assess. And I
Mhm.
feel like Gen Z is more equipped to do that than all the other generations based on their creativity and their innovativeness. And what I mean by change the way we want to assess. If I wanted to, ask you who the first president of the United States was, or, some of those recall questions, you could easily just go onto the internet and find that. You can go into AI and you can take it a step further, right? I think the way that we are going from the standpoint of assessment and education, and why Gen Z educators are probably more equipped to help than anything, is it's going to be more about the task. And that's really why we've shifted our focus. It's going to be important that we don't get to the right answer, or that our kids don't get to the right answer, because we all know that kids can go into AI and they can have a powerfully generated, beautifully written output, right? Regardless of what content area you're in. The important thing that we've got to get our kids, thinking about, and the way that we're getting our teachers to assess now, is about the task itself. How do you get to the output? What is your thinking process, and really assessing those type of things versus just getting to the right answer. So, like I said, I feel like Gen Z is more equipped for that because of their prioritization on the task and the engagement, and really understanding why in various arenas, but the why of how you got to the task, and the how you formulated your answer. AI can write it, and that's fine. But are you using your own, individual, genuine ideas in order to, input that to get your output from AI? And that's where the task and, understanding how these students are getting their thinking, I think that's going to be what drives us in the future. So hopefully we're getting out ahead of that.
Yeah, that is a wonderful perspective. So, those were all the questions that I had from my end. We have this little segment where we have the previous leader that we've done a podcast with ask a question to the next leader. So, the question that has come up for you, and it's also related to what we were talking about earlier. How is it that you protect your family time when you're working in a position that's demanding of your time almost 24/7?
That's a really good question. And, it's one that we talked about earlier that I struggle with sometimes, but I think it's just being intentional. Making sure that you're planning family dinners, or like, for example, this weekend, we kind of put the phones down and we took the kids to the zoo. It was an opportunity for us as a family to get out and actually share time with one another. But those things have to be intentional. Obviously, in school and district leadership, those are very, very busy times, especially during the sessions when school is in. So just being intentional and saying, hey, we're going to, even if it's going out to eat, we're at least going out to eat together. Or if you're at home, maybe we're going to watch a movie together, or go to the zoo like we did, over the weekend. But just making sure that you are setting aside that time, putting the devices down, and really just enjoying the family time. One of the lessons that I've learned from some of my mentors and things of that nature is they're only young ones, right? So any opportunity that I have to go, I've got a 7th grader who plays volleyball, so I try to be at every game. And then I've got a kindergartner and a preschooler who are obviously involved in different, preschool programs and kindergarten days. And, it's just making sure that we're being intentional on enjoying the experiences, because at some point those experiences are going to be gone. And, what are you going to say, that I worked 2 hours extra? And like I said, I've learned that from the Generation Z cohort. It will be here tomorrow. Your kids aren't going to be young forever. So take care of your family first.
That is a beautiful answer. And I think with that, we come to the end of this podcast. I think this is hands down one of my favorite podcasts, because I think as a Gen Z myself, and I'm pretty sure our listeners or our Gen Z educationists will also feel the same way, because the way your leadership exists, it's very understanding and it's not judgmental of the Gen Z styles. So yeah, just thank you so much for sharing your insights today. And yeah, we hope to stay in touch with you.
Well, thank you so much. And like I said, if I misspoke on anything, you're the expert on Gen Z, so you let me know.
No. As an expert on Gen Z, I can tell you that you did not misspeak at all. So yeah, just thank you so much.